Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions, 4 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. First time to the show. James McConnell Jr. is joining us today. He's going to give us more of a data-driven background in terms of restock limits. We're going to look at some of the issues that face around it, some of the myths and everything else. So James, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here and thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. Do you, as a first time on the show, would you like to give the audience a little bit of background on yourself, please?
Absolutely. So I've been in e-commerce since probably about 2010. I started in Amazon in 2017. Grew that, and I'm quite analytical, so I've dived into a lot of the nitty-gritty details around Amazon. In addition to that, I started a 3PL, it's kind of a sister company, in 2020. We all know how 2020 was an absolute joy of a year, especially with COVID limits, restrictions, shipping issues. So it came kind of as a response to that, and being able to understand Amazon really well, rather than just warehousing or just Amazon. It really kind of blends the two together and gives us a well-rounded approach.
Cool. So what we'll start with is we're going to talk about the article that you put out on restock limits. Effectively, now I found you for the IPI score, and then you dropped the restock limits, and I just enjoyed the way that you put all the data together. So if that's okay, do you want to? Should we start with? Everyone knows we're going to be talking about restock limits, but do you want to put the data-driven process behind it? What drives you, and why did you come about to do this much detail for the article?
Absolutely. Well, I guess the biggest thing, so I actually did an article on ASIN level limits when we had those last year. And it was able to, I didn't really share it a lot, but it was enough for me to kind of share with people who asked. And then with the account level limits, we noticed that there was a much bigger divide. Like, we all were kind of affected by ASIN level limits, but there was a huge amount of sellers that it was absolutely wrecking their business. There was also a large amount of sellers that they were completely fine with it. And that just hurt my interest. So obviously the first week it was pivot, learn, figure out stuff for my own business, for my close friends. I was like, okay, we have to figure out like a Band-Aid solution. What is going on? Yeah. But we couldn't understand it very well because, as you saw and know, Amazon did not give very, very clear explanations around this new policy. The problem is if they don't give explanations, and you don't understand your data behind your business very well, then now you're kind of up in the air where it seems kind of just random. Now, are there random aspects? Maybe, but I had said there has to be some sort of trend. I love looking into the details and stuff. There's a lot of pages on Amazon in Seller Central that people aren't aware of. For example, there was a lot of questions around restock limits that Amazon had a FAQ page that answered some of those questions, and people weren't even aware of that page. So it's like, okay, I'm going to dig into that page. I'm going to dig into their announcement page. I'm going to dig into any post about it. And then what's the best thing I got? I got friends in this industry. I said, hey, anyone that wants to share their data, I'm not going to be like posting your sales numbers or anything. I'm just collecting the data to plot it on graphs. And we obviously collected a lot of different data points. And then I said, okay, there's some significant correlation here. There is no correlation here. So I'm going to stop collecting things that they don't really line up with anything.
What doesn't matter? Yeah. So should we just quickly go through what aren't restock limits, and then you can kick this back between the two of us. So restock limits are not tied to cubic or volumetric storage. Restock units are not tied to IPI scores. They are calculated differently using different formulas, which we'll come down to in a little while. Restock limits are not random. Restock limits do not have the same threshold in non-US marketplace. I'd like to chat a bit more about that as well. And restock limits are not based on gross sales volume. Restock limits are not just sell more or sell faster. You can actually increase limits with slower or faster selling SKUs equally. Let's break out some of those, especially the one in around selling more or selling faster, how that is paced, basically.
Absolutely. I don't know if you want to touch on that last one as well, because I think that's also important. But the thing that we noticed was the biggest trend with restock limits is obviously we're testing all these different theories and different measures. And I don't have perfect data either. I'll recognize that. I said, hey, I need to define simple data points that people could find. I don't want you pulling 20 different reports. So I said, okay, let's pull what we got that's simple, and turnover is a major factor. The key thing about that, though, is what turnover says is it doesn't say, oh, you just need to sell more, because you could have an item that sells 10,000 units a week, some crazy number. But if you're stocking 1 million units on Amazon, your turnover is terrible. Yeah. If you're stocking 10,000 units on Amazon, you're crazy, because that's crazy low. But that would be an absolutely insane turnover. So the hard thing to balance with this, and Amazon did clarify this in their documentation, is that they said, hey, restock limits utilization, which is how much space you're using up, is how much inventory you have at Amazon and how much inventory is in working, inbound, in transit, checking in shipments. And that is what is so hard for a lot of people. What this hit really hard for is private label sellers that create a shipment in China, label all their boxes, and send it to the US. It's not a bad thing. The problem with that is now you've added, 4 weeks, 3 weeks? I don't know how long it takes exactly for every shipment, because depending on
the time in the shipping plan, instead of delaying it. Yeah.
So let's just say it takes 3 weeks from the shipment being created to it checking in on time. That is now counting against you by 3 entire weeks. It's making Amazon see, wow, you have to have this much stock. That's a lot of inventory. One thing that we looked at is saying, hey, we've got turnover, but what's another way to look at that? Because it's a little confusing for some people. As I said, days of stock. So if your item sells, let's just keep it simple, 30 units a month, 1 unit a day.
Yeah.
And you have 30 units inbound and at Amazon, you have 30 days of stock. If you have 60, you have 60 days of stock. You can double those numbers, move them around. But basically, how many days of stock do you have basically to hold your inventory in stock, to sell out, etc.? So if that's 60, that's kind of middle of the ground. I would say 45 seems to be in the middle. You get extremely penalized above 80 or 90. We saw Amazon say, hey, okay, look, 90 is really pushing it. A lot of the sellers that have more than 90 days of stock have very little limits left, or they're over 100%. Now, is this perfect or consistent? No, we have outlier data. I don't know how to explain it all, but it's a starting point that I collected dozens of sellers' data that I said, look, it's not going to be perfect for everyone, but it's going to be enough of a trend line to say, hey, I feel confident in saying that if you increase your turnover or reduce your days of stock, saying instead of 45, maybe you're down to 30, or instead of 90, you can bump that down to 60. Most of you are probably in the 60 to 90 range. That is where we saw a lot of improvement. Increasing turnover does not guarantee increasing your max limits, but everyone that we encountered that had excellent turnover had higher limits. So it's kind of this one-way correlation, and that's kind of where we started diving in, plotting more and more data. The trend lines were still consistent, obviously adjusting every little bit, but for the most part, the longer it takes for your SKUs to sell out, the more penalized you are. And it seems weird because these kind of aren't as intuitive as some of the other things within Amazon. But then again, when has Amazon ever made anything super easy?
No, they don't. The last point I missed off on the bullets here, restock recommendations on the restock inventory tab are not optimized for restock limits. Those have default settings that can be changed at SKU level. For those who don't know, do you want to explain that?
Absolutely. So if you go to your inventory planning dashboard, that's where you can kind of see your excess, your restock, your IPI, etc. A lot of people review the restock inventory page. Now, fun fact about this is slightly different, but IPI is not factoring in that data. You can anecdotally tell me that, but I can show you 2 Amazon articles that they say we do not pull in the restock. So if you have 25% restock rate, obviously not good, but it's not affecting your IPI directly. Indirectly, different story. The key thing with that is okay, how can it apply to restock limits, which are different than IPI? This is where people are saying, oh, Amazon's recommending for me to send in 120 units, yet I can't send anything else. Why is that? Well, one, if you go onto the restock inventory page and go onto basically the top right-hand corner and put customize SKU settings, you can change the settings for those calculations. So most of those calculations are based off of, quote, what you entered. Now, most people leave it at default settings. But if you actually refine those to what your supply chain looks like, what your lead times look like, those can be calculated better or worse, or keep it more lean or have more inventory. They're not based on what Amazon thinks you should stock. They're based on basically math formulas based on what your lead time says. So they can be helpful, but they're not tied to restock limits.
All right. So we now covered those major points. How does it work? Do you want to talk about what you've the conclusion you've drawn from the data?
Absolutely. Oh, one other point I did want to mention because of you said the international marketplaces.
Yes, yeah. Let's cover that quickly.
Yeah. Canada, extreme shortage because of COVID lockdowns right now. We're seeing extreme restock limits like being cut down.
It's 20 units a SKU or something like that, isn't it, in Canada?
Yeah, it's crazy. UK is also pretty tight, but you also have to think about the infrastructure that Amazon has in the very varying countries. Amazon warehouses in the US, there's tons of them. The UK, there's a lot, but there's nowhere near the amount we have at Amazon US.
It's a fraction,
Same thing with Canada. So you have to factor in that one, COVID limits or COVID restrictions and lockdowns, and then also the fact that, okay, the trucking and delivery car infrastructure in those countries are much smaller. So back to basically how the formulas work. I'm going to be full disclaimer. I don't know the exact formula. I wish I did. But what we have seen is that turnover has the most correlation between anything else. So if you want to improve that, obviously we can go into some of the how to fix it and how to improve it. But the key thing is recognizing that turnover is just not meaning to sell faster, because we all love selling more stuff. I get that. The problem is Amazon's not looking to just sell more units. They want to take a defined space. Let's just say it's 1,000 cubic feet or cubic meters, however you want to look at it. And they say, hey, if a seller's stocking 30 days of stock here, or let's just say 90 days of stock here, it's going to take 90 days for that space to clear out. Or we can force sellers to stock 30 days. That's an extreme scenario, obviously. But adjust these numbers to be bigger or smaller, however you want. Now we can fit 3 times as much inventory that's going to sell in 30 days.
The turnover, because the turnover has been reduced by 66%.
So from a business perspective, maybe these will loosen up a little bit, but unfortunately, I don't think these are going away completely. Will I hope they make it easier or more clarifying? Absolutely. Amazon, how they implemented this, absolutely terrible. But why they implemented it makes business sense for them.
Cool. What else you've got? What can you do about it? So we talked about increased frequency of shipments. Number 2 is decreased shipping times. Number 3, send the appropriate amount of inventory. 4, delete any inbound shipments that you're planning to send in. Number 5, remove. Got to spit it out today, Dan. I need more coffee. Remove or fire sell excess inventory with more than 60 days of stock. Let's go through that section there. You come to a lot of those conclusions.
Absolutely. So these can be more substantial and less substantial depending on the seller. So
depends on the side.
Increased frequency of shipments is probably going to be your biggest one. But it can also be the hardest one for some sellers, where you're looking at like, how do I send in more frequently? I got to buy 90 days of stock at a time. Well, maybe you store it in your house, your warehouse, a 3PL, etc., and they drip feed it in a box, a case, a pallet at a time. You're going to want to send, instead of we're going to do once a month or once every 2 months shipment, we're going to do twice a month or once a week with the same SKUs, but just less quantity of each SKU. So instead of sending 100 once a month, Maybe send 50 twice a month or 25 4 times a month. Can I get more expensive? Yeah, but is not being able to send in any inventory more expensive? Probably.
Yeah.
So the next one is decrease shipping times. And this isn't so much, hey, you need to go drive your own truck, but there's a couple things you can do. The shipping times is basically when the item is added to a shipment. So if your stuff's in China, don't create the shipment while it's in China. Get it to the US, get it to a warehouse, a 3PL, a freight forwarder, etc. Have them put the labels on it and create the shipment at that time, because that's going to cut down that time. The second thing is think about geographically where your stuff is going inbound. Right now, we have seen in California, which is a very, very common port, stuff taking 6 weeks from the time of pickup via partnered carrier, both LTL and UPS. UPS can be a little bit better, but LTL, it can take 6 weeks for it to get picked up to checked in at Amazon. You have to reduce that. It's like a non-negotiable at this point. Now, you may say, how can I do that? Can book your own freight. Can you work with another 3PL that drives their own trucks or books their own freight that is faster? Another thing is, and this is expensive, but it actually works for some people, is saying, hey, 6 weeks of inventory is 200 grand of stock. That's a lot of inventory. I would rather send it to somewhere more inland, whether it's in the more central United States, Texas, Chicago, etc., or another area of the United States that is not so congested, that I would say, get your stuff more inland and send it to a different FC. If you send your product from a different address, a different ship from address, it will go to a different facility. So if you're sending it from Florida, it's not going to go to Vegas like you normally send. So think about, is it more cost effective for me to move my inventory to another location and ship it from there? Because right now we have access, and the way we can build our shipments is we can book our own freight, it gets picked up, and it gets checked in the same day. That's not available to everyone that doesn't have the resources, their connections, or the capacity. If you don't have enough volume to do that, maybe you have to work with either a 3PL or friends that you have warehouses. That's just a couple options on reducing that shipping time. The next one would be sending in an appropriate amount of inventory. This kind of goes back to the first one. If you send in 100 once a month, don't send 100 twice a month. Like send in 50. You got to send in an appropriate amount of inventory in proportion to the frequency you're doing shipments. So even if you send it in less frequently, which I obviously is going to be hard, you want to make sure you're sending appropriate amounts. And keeping stock somewhere, that can be hard, expensive, complicated, etc. But it's becoming the reality. Amazon doesn't want to be the storage facility anymore. They want to be fulfillment. And that means you need to have your operations independent from Amazon. The last two, pretty simple. The easiest fix for all of this, delete any working or pending shipments that you don't plan to ship. They are affecting your restock limits. So if you have ones that you created in March or April or whatever, that, you were just testing out something, trying to figure out the cost, etc., delete those. Delete them, close them out, etc. They are hurting you. But that's an easy fix. So that can help some people in a little bit. And then the last thing, fire sale, excess inventory, pull back stock. I know it is not fun. I know it is expensive because of all the removal order fees, but you have to weigh that against the fact that, one, this may not get better anytime soon. We've hearing theories about July, but what if it gets worse? And I don't like to be the negative Nancy about this, but I also have to be practical because this affects me too. And I say, hey, if it's not selling, you may have to pull it back and or sell through it and get rid of it at a loss. The last piece of advice, and I don't recommend this for everyone, but for some people that are really encountering an issue. Right now, basically, if you think of it as a needle and you're really running out of space, so you're all the way over here, you need to overcompensate your slow sellers with extremely high turnover fast sellers. This may mean selling some items for a loss, selling some items that you don't normally sell, but you're sending in a box a day or a box, 2 cases a week or whatever, just to get that inventory, that turnover on that SKU a little bit better. That helps balance out some of your slower seller SKUs.
All right, so we covered out our article now because I want to go into the IPI score where we've got a bit of time, and then I'd love to get you back for a hack series because normally people are doing hacks on ranking, PPC, and everything, but we're going to do 3PL hacks on another show. But give us a quick rundown, just a summarize everything we've just covered. So when people are making notes and are listening back on the podcast, top 5 things in relation to the restock limits, the myth, and what to do.
Understand what turnover is for your business. If you don't understand that formula, or turnover or days of stock, they kind of go hand in hand. Figure out one of those for your business because everyone's business is different. Private label is going to have different strategies than wholesale or RA, booksellers, all that stuff. I recognize this is hard, but you have to spend the time to research that. The second thing is what can you do immediately to band-aid the solution if you're running out of space? And then what is your 3-month plan? You have to assume that it's either going to remain the same, get slightly worse. If it gets better, great. If it doesn't, you have to plan for it to remain as is or get worse. So what is your 3-month plan with that? Does that mean setting up another warehouse? Does that mean storing stuff in your garage? I don't really care what you do. You just have to have a plan that isn't all dependent on Amazon doing all of your operations anymore. You have to be diversified. And with those 2 things, I think you're pretty much set. Obviously, the little fine-tuned details there and there always help, but you have to understand those 2.
Cool. Right. Let's jump over to the 4 areas of IPI scores, which is stranded inventory, excess inventory, sell-through rate, and the final one here is in-stock inventory rate. So let's just chat through these first.
Absolutely. Now, the nice part about IPI, I would say it is easier to understand because Amazon actually gives you the formulas. If you look into their help documentation or my article, it does give you the formulas behind it. So you can piece together. Now, it doesn't give you every data metric behind the IPI, but it gives you a good starting point. We'll start with stranded. I noticed that there's not a huge impact, but it is based on number of units, not based on number of SKUs. So obviously stay on top of your stranded, but I've noticed there's not a lot of weight to it. So keep it in mind, put a VA on it, etc. But it's not a major factor. It's also really easy to fix. Open up a case if you can't fix it, because most likely it'll be fixed internally.
Just quickly, I just want to bring up this comment, which he says, Reality Bites. This is Rana. He does a lot of stuff on Clubhouse, very well respected in the industry. I think you know him already. 3PL hacks sounds so boring, but so important. Mate, it will send glass eyes to sleep. But right now, it's the sexiest thing on the planet if it's going to save you an absolute fucking fortune. Because I did say to James, how do we, it's important for me when we put content out that people are interested. They're not going to be interested in every show. We're out 4 days a week. But you still have to attempt to, when I get people going, oh, I'm an accountant, can I come on? I'm already going to sleep when I'm thinking about VAT. Everyone hates that shit. It's boring. But Rana makes a point here. It will be a boring subject, but the hacks will be good because it's really important at the moment. It's one of the most costliest things that sellers are dealing with at the moment. Sorry, James. Do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I'll just make a really brief comment on that. A lot of stuff that is really boring in this industry, you can just outsource. So say, hey, your taxes and accounting, you just outsource that. This is so fundamental for your business that you have to learn it. And that's the unfortunate part for a lot of people. So back to IPI, excess inventory. Excess inventory, once again, Amazon gives you a formula for this. I won't go into the exact formula, but basically, we all kind of understand intuitively, hey, you're stocking too much stock. If you have a couple SKUs there, not a huge deal. Everyone's going to have some sort of excess inventory at some point. But you want to keep that lean, pull back that inventory. If you're trying to launch a product, try to do it soon within sending it to Amazon. Get all of your content put out or set up before you send it to Amazon. Don't have it sit there. But with that said, it does have a weight. It's a little bit more than stranded. It doesn't seem as much as some of the other metrics, but it's just something to think about. Also, fairly easy to fix. Sell-through rate. This is also turnover, but it is calculated differently, in my opinion, than the restock limits. Amazon gives you an exact formula. And the interesting thing about this formula is it's taking snapshots every single week when the IPI is measured on that Monday night timeline. And they're actually taking a snapshot of your inventory. They're looking at your quantity of inventory today, your quantity of inventory 30 days ago, 60 days ago, and 90 days ago. They're averaging that. And then they're taking the number of units sold in the past 90 days and doing their formula. Now, those snapshots, they're harder to move up because it's based on an average. So if you say, oh man, our IPI is going really, really bad, we got to raise it quick. Well, quick and average don't really go together really well. You have to consistently keep bringing it up. If it's consistently going down, you have to correct that curve, because that's the problem with averages. One thing, you could have...
It gets dragged underwater and you're playing catch up. Yeah,
exactly. And that's where you sometimes have to overcompensate, which can be expensive. It can be a loss for product, etc. And overcompensating, sometimes you have to do that, because if you don't have storage space in Q4, like, who cares? Like that you can't do anything about that. The last one that Amazon kind of demonstrates is in-stock inventory rate. And in my article, I put this in red because everyone can say anecdotally that, hey, this affects in-stock inventory rate, or this affects IPI score. Personally, I don't believe that, because Amazon has cited in 2 different help pages that it doesn't directly affect it. Now, indirectly, Restock inventory, the rate basically is telling you, we want you to stock your fast sellers. We want you to stock a little bit of inventory. So it makes sense, because if you stock a little bit of your fast sellers and continuously restocking them, then your turnover is going to increase. So that's going to affect your turnover. It's going to not have a lot of excess inventory. So it's naturally going to affect the other metrics, but that exact percentage is documented on Amazon, 2 different places, that they do not negatively affect your IPI score. So don't worry about hiding all your recommendations, in my personal opinion. Do what you want, obviously, but they also give the formulas behind this. This formula is much more complicated, and it is per SKU, but it's something you can look into. With that said, I don't want to leave people hanging and say, oh, there's only 3 metrics. No, there's more than 3 metrics. Amazon says that there are more metrics that they factor into IPI. They don't tell us. One of those metrics that I think, based on anecdotal experience, is storage. So we noticed that oversized sellers got hit with this, with harder IPI scores than standard units. They had excellent inventory management. They had a warehouse of their own. They were drip feeding in, but they couldn't raise their IPI. My theory to that is, so much space is at Amazon, and the more units that they can fit within that space, the more money they're making, because they're making per unit. They make storage. They make money on storage, but what they really make money on is fulfillment. So if you can reduce some of your oversize or keep that extremely lean, that might help. But ultimately, there are more metrics that Amazon doesn't disclose. But sell-through is the #1 metric in all cases that we've researched.
Cool. Right, I'm just going to quickly pop these URLs into the chat as well, both of those. And for those who listening on the podcast, you'll find that at the bottom in the show notes, so you can compare the IPI and what we've been talking about in terms of the restock limits. Great. So I think we covered everything there. Very impressed by you, James, in what you're doing in terms of, normally in the industry, you're looking at people doing, hacks for ranking, as I said, and PPC, the more sexy end. But like having someone who's looking into this stuff is so important as well. And like you said, I said, sending the glass eye to sleep. This has been one of the most expensive times for Amazon sellers who are losing their ass when it comes to these restock limits, storage, and everything around it. So are you available next week to do the 3PL hacks show?
Very, very likely. I will just have to check my schedule and I can email you.
Cool. And how does people get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So I have my 3PL website, marketplaceprep.com. We'll also see those links for the blog articles. I encourage everyone to go read them because, hey, I want you to understand this for your business. Ultimately, if you increase your turnover, it'll help. If you want to reach out to me, I'm on most of the platforms. I've networked with a lot of people on Facebook, my name, but Instagram, James Universe, and I'm on Clubhouse, James Universe. So kind of however you want to reach me, you can probably find me by either my name or the handle James Universe.
Excellent. Guys, I'll be back here tomorrow with Tim Jordan. We're going to be talking about an array of options for raising capital prior to selling your business to an aggregator or a third party of some kind. But yeah, Tim will be here tomorrow. Take care of yourself and your family. Much love. I'll see you tomorrow. James, thank you for joining us, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.